Hey, this is Talia with Will They Won't They. I own too many knitting books and I want to share them all with you, especially the ones that are useful. So what we have today is the first book in a series that I think once you've gotten to a certain point in knitting, every knitter should have. So spoiler alert, this is going to be a highly recommend, and that is A Treasury of Knitting Patterns by Barbara Walker. Today I'm just going to look at the first book. I believe there's 4 in all. I think I have 3 of them. The second one's one of my favorite, but we're going to start with the first one because I think it's a great one, especially if you're just getting into adapting knitting patterns with your own stitch patterns. So this is put out by Schoolhouse Press. I believe it only exists as a paperback. I might be wrong on that, but I definitely don't think there's like a Kindle or ebook version, which is fine by me. I think it's a beautiful book to flip through. And Barbara Walker was like a genius of knitting. She was incredibly thorough in her studying of knitting. People would send her stitch patterns and she carefully cataloged them. Later on, she carefully charts them. But let's take a look inside the book and you'll kind of get an idea of how all her books are set up. I'll probably look at the other books at another time, but I just wanted to start with this one. Let's start with the table of contents. There is a brief introduction and some, glossary abbreviations, but there isn't going to be one of those like how to knit sections in this book, at least not thorough enough for a beginner knitter to use. So you need to at least know how to cast on, knit, purl, and cast off to get any use out of this book. So I would say this book is not for a complete beginner. She organizes this first book and all the subsequent books by technique used to get that stitch pattern. So, she starts off with simple knit purl combinations, which is great for beginners. She has ones for twisted stitch patterns, fancy textures that use like techniques that are kind of unique, that there's not quite a name for it. Eyelet patterns, lace patterns. She differentiates between the two. Cable stitch patterns. I mean, really just like this first book has a nice overview of all the knitting techniques you could use to get a fabric that you want. Let's start with the knit purl section. I'm just going to pick a random page, but you can kind of get an idea of how it's laid out. She usually has a picture. It's all black and white on the left. A brief little introduction, maybe a little bit of the history of the stitch or why she likes it, whether it's reversible, things like that. Just interesting notes about the stitch pattern. And then she has the directions in this first book written out flat. So one thing I would say is if you're not knitting flat, if you're knitting in the round, you're going to have to convert this to in the round. It's not that hard to do. It's even easier if you decide to chart this out and then kind of figure it out from there. But this is knit to be flat. This was knit during a time, this was written during a time when sweaters would be knit from the bottom up and seamed. You didn't have as many top-down patterns as you do today. And not as many in the round patterns as you do today. I might flip through and say, oh, I'm working on a vest and, ooh, I really like this kind of like staggered organ pipe texture. Ooh, it's a multiple of 6 plus 4. When flat, I know from knitting that if I do it in the round, it'll just be a multiple of 6, and then I can just follow the directions. And I'm going to flip to my favorite section of the book, which is something that Barbara Walker is kind of known for, is her slip stitch and mosaic knitting. And slip stitch color work, it's a tragedy this is in black and white. There is a website, and I'll put a link below, where people have been making color swatches. But when you do slip stitch in 2 colors, you get these brilliant textures like tweeds and honeycombs and things like that. But unlike stranded, you're only working with 1 color at a time. You're doing 2 rows with 1 color, 2 rows with another. So if you can knit stripes, you can do all these like really magnificent color work techniques. It looks great with a variegated yarn, like use 1 solid and 1 variegated. It really breaks up the pooling and it looks fantastic. I did a hat with a very similar pattern to like this, where you have some slip stitches that elongate the stitches for the variegated, and then like there's a nice background of a solid so it's not too busy. So I actually think this is my favorite part of this first book. And yeah, easy to adapt, easy to look at. I mean, I'm not a huge cable knitter, but her cables are gorgeous. I mean, there's just so much variety, very clearly written. I mean, just this one book you could get a lifetime of knitting out of. I'm a nerd, so I collected most of them. But yeah, so that is A Treasury of Knitting Patterns. So each of these reviews, I want to go over what I think of the book. I'm not going to rate them because I think it's so subjective, but I'll say who I think it's for and what I get out of this. For me, this is for any knitter who wants to customize something you're working on. I mean, even if you're just doing dishcloths, you could just pick one of these stitch patterns, figure out a multiple that gets the size you want, and knit yourself a dishcloth in a beautiful texture. So I would say this is for all knitters who know the basics of knit, purl, and cast on, cast off. Everything else you can just Google how to do. I also, excuse the radiators going in the background. I think it's especially great for people who want to design their own clothing patterns and really start to understand how fabrics work. There is so much to draw from here, and you could adapt the stitch patterns, sit down with it, chart it out in your favorite charting software or even on a graph paper, and maybe move the lace stitches a little or move the cables a bit or combine them. You could really get a lot out of this book. So if you're somebody who likes to customize, if you're somebody who likes to play with your fabric and understand what you're knitting, if you're somebody who's learning and wants to try different stitch patterns to get used to different techniques, this is an invaluable resource. And I recommend getting at least this one and the second one. I think those two books alone could take you through decades of knitting. So yeah, that's A Treasury of Knitting Patterns by Barbara G. Walker, and I recommend it for everyone, unless you're really, really new. And even then, it's really inspiring. So if you feel like looking at the pretty pictures until you learn how to do it, could be good for you too. So yeah, thanks for joining. I'll go through another book next time.